All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Morgan, and I'm an event manager with Politics and Prose, and I would like to welcome you all to PNP Live. Soon, I will drop a link in the chat where you can order your copy of A Tiny Upward Shove straight from PNP's website. You can ask our speakers a question this evening by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to all of your questions as much as we can towards the end of the program, but we apologize in advance if we don't have a time to address your exact question. Also, there are auto captions for this event by hitting the live caption button at the bottom of your screen. Let me introduce tonight's guest. Melissa Chadburn her writing has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times Book Review, the New York Review of Books, the Paris Review Daily, the Best American Food Writing, and many other publications. Her extensive reporting on the child welfare system appears in the Netflix docuseries, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Melissa is a worker, lover, and through her own labor and literary citizenship, strives to upend economic violence. Her mother taught her how to sharpen a pencil with a knife, and she's basically been doing that ever since. She is a PhD candidate in creative writing at the University of Southern California and lives in Greater Los Angeles. Melissa will be in conversation with Martha Ann Toll, who writes fiction, essays, and book reviews, and reads anything that's not nailed down. Her debut novel, Three Muses, won the Prechter Prize for finely crafted fiction and is forthcoming from Regal House Publishing on September 20th of this year. Toll brings a long career in social justice to her work covering Black, Indigenous, and people of color and women writers. She is a book reviewer and author interviewer at NPR Books, The Washington Post, Point Magazine, The Millions, and elsewhere. She also publishes short fiction and essays in a wide variety of outlets. Let's give our guests a virtual round of applause.
Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody. First, I want to thank Morgan for introducing us and Politics and Prose for hosting us. And thank you all for joining us. It's really exciting. So I could not be happier to be interviewing Melissa tonight. Way back in 2012, I was at the Tin House Writers Workshop with Melissa, and there was an open mic night, and I heard Melissa read, and I have been a complete inveterate fangirl ever since. So I have followed her journalism career, and I try never to miss one of her bylines. So I feel like we're super lucky to see you tonight. A bunch of years ago, I started to hear about Melissa's novel, which has an absolutely spectacular cover. This is the novel, and it's what's in between the covers is even better. And I have been eagerly awaiting it. So Melissa, super thrilled to be here. As I was just saying to Melissa off camera, I have a review forthcoming in the Los Angeles Review of Books of Melissa's book, and I am thrilled that Publishers Weekly, which is an influencer in the book industry, came out with a fantastic review. I'm going to just read two quick things from the Publishers Weekly review. In Chadburn's astonishing debut, the story of a Filipino woman's short life is told by an Aswang spirit. And then in 1994, after 18-year-old Marina Salas is murdered by serial killer Willie Picton, the folkloric and omniscient Aswang enters her body and recounts Marina's harrowing coming of age. The author's poetic language enthralls. So we are in for a huge treat, and I cannot encourage you enough to run out and buy Melissa's book. So Melissa, I think we have agreed that we would start with a short reading, particularly to give our audience a sense of your punchy and acerbic prose. So do you mind telling us what you're reading from? And we're super looking forward to this.
Sure. So this is just, I'm going to read from the first pages. So I don't need to set this up at all. This is going to be the first words that you come across. So here we go. Don't believe anyone who tells you that death comes quick and painless. That's bullshit. Dying hurts like fuck all everything. You can feel all the pains, the hurts, the joys, the cries of all the world. There's no numbing dope, no dick wows, no kitty kitty yum yum, just a floodlight on all the world's needs. Death is a dump. You see it all. Kids, parents, teachers, the rats under the street that run through the sewers, suck, suck, squeak, squeak. The pigeons that shit everywhere. The throwaways nobody else wants, the thugs, the queers, the hoes, the junkies, the brats, the fuck-ups, the killers. Let me get this straight. The way I'm telling you any of this, I'm Aswang. And I know about the slow agonies of death because this body belonged to one of the throwaways. An 18-year-old girl named Marina who wound up murdered on a pig farm in a place called Port Coquitlam. Before I finished the tinikling, before I jumped into her body, before Marina found Willie in the corner of Main and Hastings, before the track marks on the insides of her knees and elbows, she lived a cleaner life. Before the late night diner trips where she saw, before falling into sleep, her mother's face, a face took up with large dark eyes reflecting the suspicion of others. She still hoped to be a pure spirit. Marina used to be 12. She used to live in a group home named for trees, 5 in a cottage out in the valley. She had the bottom bunk and Alex on top, too close to the popcorn ceiling plastered with CK1 ads torn out of fashion magazines. She used to look into people's dining rooms as she walked down the street. She put herself at one of those tables with roasted chicken and vegetables picked from a garden, not mashed potatoes poured flaky out of a box like her ma used to make, not carnation powdered milk mixed with water, though she did like to pick out the congealed lumps and feel them separate like pudding on her tongue. She used to do graffiti on government-issued desks waiting for her name to be called. Marina used to stand around with teenage boys on the street corner waiting for the light to change. She used to hitch rides through the valley and give strange men hand jobs for $20. Marina used to worry about gonorrhea and feel like she was the worst piece of living fuck shit. And before all that, Marina used to be 5. She used to lie on her tummy, a thumb plunked in her mouth, index finger curled around her nose. And sometimes Mucha would come in and rub her back and tell her a story of a time long, long before. Marina used to leave a small music box outside in the rain, hoping to attract fairies. She used to practice kissing girls on the back of her hand or her own shoulder just to see what her skin tasted like. She used to get all squirmy and thrilled watching whodunits with her mom. She used to long for the ordinary. She used to live with Jess' Ma, and they might have been poor, but they had a good time. Their homemade games were sometimes Marina running out to the garage behind the apartment building and picking up the water hose. She'd learned how to spray the water so it swished up toward the sky and back down like her own private waterfall. Then she ran around the apartment shouting, "Bom, bay, bee, bo, boo," a pillowcase, her white wings tied around her neck, her childlike chatter so candid and fresh, and right then she figured she was the luckiest girl alive. The man who strangled Marina was a puckshit trick who didn't know how to be a trick, always fell in love with the wrong girl. Pure Poco trash drove around Vancouver in his van loaded with possibilities. To him, women like Marina were nothing but a reminder of all his failings. There in that room, leaning above her, his closed smile turned into a full-on cheese. There were his rotted teeth, his puffy gray gums, and for a split moment, for the final time in her throwaway life, she felt her mithin, that exquisite pain of want, desire, but want is for the living. And by that dark, barely morning hour, Marina was already near dead. As he throttled her, she felt her own muffled sounds push into the part of her that had been sleeping, cut off a long time ago. Her screams clung to that hollowed out part, to her guts, to the trailer walls, then zipped along the hot gas of the cosmos as the dark stone sky settled over the farm. The moment she was dying, Marina prayed. First, she prayed an invocation, something she'd heard her Lola say over and over again. Let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let love stream forth into the hearts of men. Let purpose guide the little wills of men. Let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. She thought of her Lola's cool hands on her burning forehead when she was stuck home sick. Mounted on the wall above them was the head of a golden horse. Marina stared deep into the dark nostrils of the horse. Her murderer straddled her on top of the bed, his hands clasped around her neck. The face he showed her, the face that was breathing hard, placed no more than a foot from her own, was stuck in a tight grin. The face of an oink-oink boy. The pigs he farmed, both of them drenched in the toxic effect of all the sorrow coursing from his hands to her neck, from her neck to his hands, the smudges of smoke on the walls, the dark corners of the ceiling, a wisp of spider's webs in the corner of the nostril of the head of the horse. Her Lola's prayer wasn't working. Lola belonged to a generation of obedience and atonement. Marina's was a generation of don't give a fucks. So she made a special kind of prayer. Marina imagined hupon wrapped in taro leaves, stewed in chiles and coconut milk. She imagined a small loaf of sticky rice with mango. Fly swatters, brown rubber discs used to open jars, large wooden utensils hanging from a kitchen wall, bamboo mats painted with anthuriums, the mats that she slipped on in her Lola's house in Seaside, California. She thought of Alex, the love of her life, and her perfect eyeliner, how it made her look elegant, like the flawless face of a calculating wife. This prayer didn't work either if working means saving her from death, but the prayer did work if working means turning her into me, into something powerful, into Aswang. The truth in the prayer summons the Aswang first by bringing up her ancestral bloodline, and then the key to tying me to her, unfinished business. Marina was murdered mid-quest. She chanted this mantra in her mind over and over, pulling me out of the ether and down into her body, merging with the powers that carry me across time into generations of her family. The words spread out around her, invaded her ears, her mouth, and to the sound of her scream became me.
Thank you so much. What an incredibly powerful opening. And the amazing thing to me is that you sustained that level of energy through the whole novel. One of the things I love about that opening is that you have pretty much set up the entire novel to come, and also much of how you wrote the novel. And I want to start there. First of all, you're writing about a real serial murderer named Willie Picton. And it's really the Aswang who narrates the book. So I wanted to ask you to set that up a little bit more and explain what your understanding is of what Aswang is in Filipino mythology. And also, we heard it in your reading, your use of Tagalog, and I loved the fact that you put it all through the book, and that we readers who don't know Tagalog are completely with you, or with you when you use it. So can you set it up a bit for us?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on where you're from, the Aswang could be anything. I mean, some people will say the Aswang is half wolf, half woman. Some people will say she's a vampire. Some people will say she's a shapeshifter. Some people will say she's, God forbid, a woman who lives alone, a spinster, an old woman who lives by herself with no children. So, and in truth, the Aswang was born out of colonialism and enlightenment, and a threat to colonizers, and that women had sexual freedom before the Aswang, and political freedom and power. And so, to me, I just think this is sort of, I consider the book sort of a love letter to Lolas, and a love letter to grandmothers everywhere, and a love letter to the Aswang, I think. In writing this story, since I write nonfiction and I write journalism, like when I set out to write something, I often consider like, what's the right container for this story? And I really wanted to be able to tell a whole story. In order to tell the whole story, I thought that of a whole life, starting with a death, it seemed like fiction seemed to be the best container and the best vehicle to do that. And the Aswang has access to other people's memories. And so that allowed me to, build towards empathy. I as it was mentioned in my bio, when I was writing this, part of the time that I was writing this, as you mentioned, we met at Tin House a billion years ago. And I was workshopping this book then a billion years ago. And so, but part of the time while I was writing this, I was reporting on this particularly harrowing case in the child welfare system. And I just knew that my larger project would be troubling these ideas of like justice and mercy, or ideas of justice and mercy. And, I think you and I are both activists as well. And I think that needed to figure in somehow in this work. And so the Aswang's capacity to engage other people's memories allowed to build empathy and allowed to build us towards this other idea of justice and mercy.
Thank you. And I loved what you said about finding the right container for your story. And your journalism career has been, I mean, I almost don't want to call it journalism because it's really social justice. I mean, it's really a fight for justice. Can you talk about how your current journalism work or your past journalism work is informed this piece of fiction? And, you know, sort of, is it a porous boundary, or how do they inform each other?
Well, I mean, I think this novel, you know, is the antagonist the Aswang? Is the antagonist Willie Picton, the serial killer? Or is it like, or am I hopefully capturing these slow forms of killing, larger systemic failures, you know, whether it be the child welfare system, whether it be economic violence, whether it be physical violence, sexual violence. I chose Willie Picton, but there were multiple serial killers operating in the same area at the same time who preyed upon the missing and murdered Indigenous women and women of color, particularly women who are drug addicted and sex workers. And so I wanted to point out multiple fissures along the way. And so I think that's, and I do incorporate like some actual like case records and forms in the novel as well. So I think that like, I hope that there is some commentary that's being made there that I think that the reader can understand in terms of the failures within our child welfare system.
Thank you. I mean, and one of the things that I took away very powerfully from reading the book is this urge to give these women a voice, to have them seen, because so many of them are even unnamed. We don't even know the names of the victims. We don't know enough about them. Your murderer is named Willie Picton. As you mentioned, he's a real life character. He was a serial murderer operating primarily in the Vancouver area. And one of the amazing things that you did was paint him as a fully developed human being. And I felt as a reader, we were forced to empathize with him at different points. And I wanted to ask you about that. How did you do that? How did you think about it? I mean, he's really a monster and he's a murderer, but we also see him as a human being.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that then, you know, we've also been taught that the Aswang is a monster, you know, and it's like, who's the monster? But I just think that the truth is the most interesting story, and the truth is often complicated. You know, there's no good or bad. It would be too easy if there were people that were just all good or people that were all bad. And so I think that he's hopefully made him fully fleshed. So yeah, so I think that that was again like the larger idea about mercy was what interested me. And I have always troubled our ideas about the justice system and what's justice. Like a normal sort of true crime trope or trajectory is like there's a bad guy and like you're on the hunt for him, and then he gets arrested and he gets put into jail. And like you know, I don't know if I subscribe to carceral justice in that way, and that you know, I think that it is a little bit more complicated than that. And you know, everybody doesn't get to rejoice when the bad guy gets put into prison, I guess.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in some of your early comments the extremely broken child welfare system, and the hero in this book, Marina, ends up there. She's a very brilliant student, and she's waylaid by trauma in her own life and ends up there. I wondered if you could talk about her time in that system and what happened to her education there, and I mean, I don't want to call it education, but what happens to her trajectory in the child welfare system, and where were you drawing from when you were describing that?
Well, I just, I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head anymore, but it's very rare that anybody who goes through our foster care system goes on to higher education. And yet Marina is, first generation. She would have been a first generation student, and one of her ways of getting out of poverty, she'd always taught, was by way of education. So, from a young child, she wanted to do something to make her family wealthy. Her mom raised her as a single mother. And so she, for a while, practiced trying to be a neurosurgeon. And she was told that in order to become a neurosurgeon, she needed to take the skin of the grape off of the meat of the grape in one piece and then sew it back on. And she practiced that to try to make a way out of no way. So she was very interested in somehow finding a way to provide for her family. But yet when she went into foster care, she was encouraged to take the GED and encouraged to take on-site classes, which were classes that were, on a slower trajectory than she wanted to, she wanted to go to college. That was her dream. And so that she definitely had to reconcile that. And I think that that's just one of the critiques I have of the child welfare system. I know firsthand what it's like to really want to go to. I dreamt of going to Sarah Lawrence. I heard that Alice Walker went to Sarah Lawrence, and I just dreamt of going to Sarah Lawrence. And I know that the conversations about college really shifted after I entered the foster care system. And I think that that's a critique that I have overall.
I mean, that's a huge, huge issue. We know that foster care spending time in foster care is one of the biggest predictors of future homelessness as well. Can you talk about Marina's time actually in the system, and whether there was any attempt to keep kids in school, or sort of what happens to Marina's life once she's in the system?
I think Marina thinks that this is going to be a temporary arrangement until she could go and live with her grandmother and be reunited with her grandmother. And unfortunately, I think that's the case for many kids in the foster care system. If they enter at a later age, it's really hard to find placement outside of the family. And so she ends up just staying on until she gets emancipated. I mean, I will say now there are there are states and counties that are recognizing family friends who are like family. So I think they call it like fictive aunts or something like that. But they are extending family reunification to people who are beyond the immediate family and friends of the family, or family-like or chosen family members. But and at this time, this was the mid-90s when Marina was in the foster care system, and it was around the same time as welfare reform. And there was just all the services that people used to get from welfare were now getting so they used to get from the Department of Public Social Services. After temporary assistance to needy families was imposed, they all then had to get all those services from Department of Children and Family Services. And so all of it, caseloads went wild, and children ended up being misplaced for a much longer time.
And I mean, I guess it's fair to say for all the kids, and particularly smart kids like Marina, there's no effort to try to provide any kind of meaningful educational opportunities once she's in the system. I wanted to clarify that word emancipation, which is what I really hate that word with regard to the care system, because we expect teenagers who have been essentially completely abandoned by society at ages 16 or 18 to provide for themselves, find a job, get educated, rent a place, which we would absolutely, there is no parent of a teenager in America who would expect that of their own child. So we make demands on children, quote, exiting the foster care system that we would never make on our own children. And it's one of the things that is absolutely appalling about the system, I feel.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, emancipation sounds so fucking rad, right? It's like an amazing thing. And it's just a really fancy way of saying that you turned 17 and a half usually, yeah, and that you will no longer receive any fiscal support from the county. That's all that means. Right. Sometimes you get like $200 in a cake or like a gift certificate, but you can get a certificate, you can get eligible for some sort of subsidized housing. I was referred to go on GR, which was also just like a $200 supplement. So
that's California's general
relief,
which most states don't even have that. So
okay, yeah. So
we are making demands on these kids basically that we would never make on any other kids. So it's an absolute recipe for disaster, and we need a lot of things to change. Marina finds love, I would say, and support within the system. And can you talk a little bit about that, about how she sort of not only survives, but thrives in a certain way in her friendships and love?
Yeah, I mean, I joke that like, even though some words used to describe this book are like gritty or haunting, and I would, that's correct, that's true too, but this is also sort of at the heart of it is this really sweet queer love story. So in many ways, it's a romance. She meets she meets Alex in the system, who is her bunk mate, and yeah, and I think for the first time, really, well, maybe not the first time, she did have a big crush on her best friend when she was even younger, but she has a friend in foster care. And I think that these bonds do thicken quite fast when you're a teenager. I mean, one, you're working on teen time, which is just like a totally different time frame than the rest of us. But she falls in love, and that ends up becoming a really central relationship to her life.
Thank you. Just for our audience out there, as you're listening to Melissa and you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box for us to ask Melissa a little bit later in this conversation. So I know a little bit that this book took a long time to be born. I think most books take a long time to be born. I think you also had some issues with editors leaving and publishing. So can you give us a little bit of a history of this book? And then I want to also ask you about your writing process, but let's talk about the book itself first.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. It took like 7 years. That's like post contract, which is wild. And I mean, part of that is my editor changed publishing houses, but most of that was just, I was given the attention, very close attention from my editor. So in some ways, I guess that's a gift, although I did try to avoid like social gatherings and parties and stuff for a while, because I didn't know how to respond to the like, how's the book coming conversation. But and I'm a different person than I was when I started this book, and it's a different book than it was when I started this book. And I think it's a much better book. I think that I learned a lot about how to grapple with my fears that I think a lot of us have whether it be, 6 months or 7 years, in terms of having this project that exists in your mind before it goes out in the world. Before we were recording and before y'all joined us, I was just like, this is my first book event. This is the first time I'm going to be talking to somebody who read this thing that has only existed in my mind. But yeah, so that was that. Multiple iterations of workshopping it with my editor. And then what was the other question?
Well, I think readers often want to know what would you say your writing process is, and do you have a regular writing practice, and what would you say that it is?
I do. I have a regular writing practice. I'm up at 4 a.m. I'm up at 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. and it's the only time it's quiet. I'm actually so shocked right now that I have been able to speak to you all this long without my dogs making a bunch of racket. But I have 3 dogs, and so I have to beat them because I'm outnumbered for my quiet time. And I try to write for 2 hours. I heard early on, I think it's Amy Bender, who says that she writes for 2 hours, and regardless of how the writing is going, stops at 2 hours. So even if I'm doing great, I try to stop at 2 hours to like keep that energy and then return to it again the following day. And then I try to go outside. Now that's like the ideal situation. I'm not saying that I actually am capable of accomplishing this every day, but that's usually what I like my writing life to look like. And sometimes it looks like that.
And you have many, many other writing obligations on your plate. You're a working journalist, and you also are a PhD student. So can you add that into the mix, or where does all that fit in?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that I needed to see my name in print in all that time that I was working on this novel. And so I did end up publishing a lot in nonfiction and journalism. I do also see oftentimes, like when I said I'm container hunting when I go to take on a project. So it really just depends on like what my intention is. Like sometimes if the intention is to have impact or to change something, then I will go to journalism for that, whereas sometimes I have an intention with language and I will go to nonfiction from that, especially because I can only I couldn't, commit to any other larger worlds, and I was popping in and out of this world so much. So I would turn to the short form and mostly publish in nonfiction and journalism in that time.
And will you be writing a thesis for your PhD work?
Yeah, I get to write 2. I get to write 2 dissertations. So one of my dissertations is a critical dissertation, and I just hit send on my prospectus this morning. So
congratulations.
That will be great. And then my creative dissertation, I have been grappling with these case records of child fatalities within LA County for a long time. I have had a bunch of them, and I have a website called theredacted.org, and I tried to look at the redactions. I have all these redacted case files, and I tried to look at the redactions and think about like, okay, so I have these case records now like, what can I do with them? And so first I made them public, and I thought maybe that would like shift the gaze a bit. And then I wasn't really satisfied with what was being accomplished there. And so then I tried to do a contrapuntal reading of the redactions and wasn't wholly satisfied with what was happening there. And then we were in the Netflix docuseries came out, and then we were in the midst of this pandemic, and we had the stay-at-home order and the shelter-in-place order, and I was out walking my dog in the snow one day, and I was like listening to this fairy tale, Who Will Greet You at Home by Leslie Anima Nekerema, and she talked about this maternal longing in this way, but I realized like, oh wait, for some reason, people are able to read about child murder in fairy tales. Like it's a very prevalent theme in fairy tales. And what is it about the fairy tale that allows people to receive these narratives? Like, what is it about enchantment that allows us to receive these narratives? So for my creative dissertation, I am translating these case records to fairy tales. And so that's a very long way to say that. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. And that makes me think, although she's not writing about similar subject matter to you, but it makes me think a bit of Helen Oyemi, whose writing I love.
Yeah.
And she's done unbelievable work with fairy tales.
Yeah.
And it was a different focus, but that's fantastic. So we have some wonderful questions in the chat. I want to ask you one more before we turn to them. And that is the very complex and beautifully rendered relationship between Marina and Mutia, her mother, which is complicated. Who's the mother, who's the daughter, and Mutia herself is after her own educational pursuits. There's a lot going on there, and I wondered if you could talk to us about that. I can imagine that was pretty difficult to get on the page, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the same thing with Willie. It's like the truth is the most interesting story, but the truth is very complicated. And gosh, moms, like if it's not one thing, it's your mother, right? Like moms are so complicated. But she taught her how to dance to the Bee Gees and how to kick guys where it counts. And like, you know, she was very whimsical and probably suffers from some undiagnosed mental illness. And that often presents as whimsy as well. So I think that that's where that came from.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of Marina's relationship to her mom, I think she's dependent and very inspired by her mom, but her mom can't always deliver because in some ways she's still trying to reach her own dreams, and it's hard for her to focus on her daughter. I mean, in terms of, Mutia has her own educational desires. So I think that, makes their relationship a lot more complex in terms of who's mothering who. And we know that is something that definitely happens in real life a whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I feel for single mothers out there everywhere trying, and they moved to Los Angeles because she got accepted to UCLA. And so she was trying to go to school and trying to be a mom and trying to date and do all that stuff.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to start, we have some really terrific questions. I'm going to start with the first one, which is, can you talk about the research process for this book?
Yeah. Well, I think I did read a lot and watch a lot of films. There was fortunately not a limitation of information about Willie Picton, so I got to watch a lot of films about Willie Picton and I read there's a book that's actually going to be made into a film anyhow, On the Farm. And so there I got to do like my favorite thing of like reporting is like digging into like the research, and I got to like satisfy that like research brain. And then I also got to play in fiction land, and do all this magic stuff with it when it came to the Aswang. So it was equal parts, like I got to use both sides of my brain. So that was fun.
Oh, I love that. There's a question here, and it kind of harks back to what we were talking about, your writing practice. And I'm going to get off this chat and never forgive myself because I won't get up at 4:30 in the morning. But the question is, can you talk a bit more about how you organize your time in order to work on several different projects? And could you also talk, let me start with that. There's a second question here as well.
How do I organize my time to work on several different projects? Well, I always joke that like if I did write a memoir, it would be called Useless Afternoon, because so like my brain in terms of generative work only works really well in the morning, and then the rest of the day is for like doing something physical, like getting some outside time, and then reading or research or watching copious amounts of garbage television. I do have to like just unwind with reality dating shows and stuff.
Especially, I mean, given, I was thinking about inhabiting Willie Picton's body and mind as thoroughly as you did. It's must have been incredibly difficult.
I also kind of like it. I mean, I'm like one of those people where I like to look into the darkness, because I assume everybody's out there doing terrible shit all the time anyways, and I want to know about it, basically.
Yeah. The second part of the question about organizing your time was related to what I just asked. Could you talk about maintaining enough emotional detachment to work with such horrifying, infuriating, and emotionally intense material, both journalistically and in fiction?
Yeah. I mean, my self-care is like, the thing about the Gabriel Fernandez thing was really interesting because, like I said, we had the shelter in place order right after it went out into the world. And this is, I mean, people read, but like people watch TV is what I learned from this. It's like, I was like, wow, people really, I would get stopped in the street. I would get stopped at the store. I'm like, oh, a lot of people do this, watch TV. And so, and at one point I felt like everybody was talking about this thing that was so important to me. And I was able to have this conversation that was so important to me. And then it was kind of like, who turned out all the lights? And when we were to shelter in place, and I was getting lots of reports of other kids who were in unsafe circumstances around the country. And in some ways, I think it was good that I couldn't do anything but just like light a fire in the fireplace, huddle under some blankets, and just chill with my dogs, because I probably would have wanted to just go out and pursue a lot of other reporting had I not been ordered to stay in place. And so in some ways that was good self-care on my part. And so I think I just really got to balance my inside time and my outside time. Like I was talking to my sister the other day and I was like, I miss like driving for hours and drinking like sugar-free Red Bull and like smoking cigarettes and talking to strangers. Like for some reason, there's like this really romantic idea of that I miss. And I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but I just think something seems so satisfying about that. But it's because I do want like, I like my outside life and my inside life,
Thank you. We've touched on this a little bit, but there's a question that I think is asking it quite clearly. So I'm going to read it, if that's okay. I wonder about the relationship between your journalism and fiction writing. How do they relate and talk to one another? And what have you found that fiction can do as a form that journalism can't?
Yeah, I mean, there is that movement between, I think the document is limited, and that's what my critical dissertation is about, are the limitations of the document. Like there's so much we cannot say in the archive, what does it feel for something to be unbearable? What does loss and longing feel like? With journalism and reporting, there's this sort of idea that you will practice this both sideism and you will practice this certain level of objectivity, when in fact we all know that that's not the case, but and by whose standards. And so I think in a way fiction really just frees me up to translate those feelings of all the affect, like of unbearability, and translate those feelings of longing and loss and grief that you can't really have in reporting.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. And again, this is a related question, but I want to make sure there isn't more that you want to say about this, which is, how did your nonfiction experience serve you while writing the novel?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain level of attunement I hope all writers have, but I think that my non-fictive experience, I my first essay that I had ever published that ever got any sort of attention or readership was called The Throwaways. And it was, well, you think it's about a young woman who grows up in foster care, but you later learn it's about taxes and what a radical tool taxes are for equity. So I think, but overall, my project does concern itself with people who are construed as throwaway or people on the margins. And I think that has definitely informed this book. If you read that, if you go back and read that initial essay, The Throwaways, and you read this text, you'll realize like the intersection there between, the importance of lending agency to those who don't have it.
I'm thinking that was a beautiful answer, and I'm thinking about an article of yours that I read quite a while ago about resilience, which is a word that I now question every time I hear it because I read your piece, which is why do we expect the people who are the most injured and destroyed by society to be resilient when we don't ask that of people who are well sheltered and well cared for? And it changed my whole view, and I think we're still talking about resilience, and I mean it's nice, but it's a ridiculous expectation, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I mean, it's such a weird word. It's a scientific term, and it means that something assumes its original shape upon impact. So I always think back to those cars, the Saturn, where you like hit the door and it pops out, and like, well, one, why should we have that expectation that people assume their original shape after experiencing some trauma or impact? And then two, who's to say that a drug dealer in South LA is less resilient than somebody who works for Wall Street? I mean, but the promotion of resilience without as well as an advocating for it is often used as a screen to advocate for decreased
resources,
supports and resources. And
yeah.
so, and rather than telling somebody they're resilient and give them a guaranteed income, long-term affordable housing, an education,
right.
trying to spirit resilience. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So thank you for that. I want to encourage folks to we have time for a couple more questions. And Melissa, do you have another short piece that you want to read for us?
Sure. I'll read a little teeny bit. I can't promise you that I won't cry, but I will try.
Thank you.
This is, so Marina's in the group home, and like I said, she was hoping to be reunited with her grandmother, but has discovered that her grandmother passed, and she visits her in her sleep. Her Lola does. Now on the other side, Lola is sitting at some kitchen table, eating a piece of toast topped with sweetened condensed milk. This is her favorite thing. The sweet goopiness reminds her of coming to the States from the Philippines, of all the vulgar, extravagant things to discover. There are shiny cars, there are various types of domestic animals, there is clothing for the pets, there is bottled water, there is a gymnasium, sometimes more than one within 2 blocks of another, just a place that people go to and pay money to sweat in. There is food from every country. There is clothing that is more expensive if it looks well worn. But this toast, this sweet cream, this is the sweetest cream, the gluttony of it. She can, if she wants, eat the entire loaf, toast each piece of bread and pour a generous amount of sweet condensed milk on it. Yet what makes this even more extravagant, what makes her feel the most rich about this is she does not. She saves it for later. She partakes only a little at a time. The dog, someone else's German Shepherd, is sitting beside her, staring at her with sad eyes, longing eyes. She breaks off the crust and shares it with the dog. This to her is a luxurious thing, to practice self-restraint. Self-restraint, 2 words not available to her in life. In my day, Reen, everybody knew how to act, how to curtsy when they met you, how to keep your elbows off the table, how to ask to please be excused. Then, like my little baby, we girls, we knew how to disappear. And if some boy comes to pick you up, to go on a date or to eat ice cream, you knew he was there for your Hia. I tell all the girls, make him come knock. Make him come ring the bell at least. When a man cannot be bothered to leave his car, he is not a man of honor. Nowadays, you're all in a hurry to try to be seen. You move so fast. You think if you move fast, you will not disappear. You think if you move a lot, you will not die. But running to a man, not a man at the Meade, slouching in his Sirang Sira loud car, he'll never rise. He'll never carry you. You will be there on the sidelines of his life, cheering so loud, and then you will forget to live your own life, to grow new life, to make a difference. There are many days that I was still and my heart felt alone, but when you came, my heart rose up on all her tiny little feet and she cheered, Viva! He will never know, no matter how much bulbul you flick at him. The tiny curly hairs could get confused for a dog's. Don't forget to bundle up for winter. Don't forget to eat your breakfast. Spam and eggs, rice is good too. Remember when I used to work at the Stride Right? Sometimes I spent long days staring out the window. And I would put all that murang crap on the conveyor belt one by one. Then sometimes you'd come visit or pass by the window, and my heart would start dancing again. Sometimes I'd catch you with your thumb in your mouth. I asked, what are you doing? You said nothing. That is okay. It's okay to lie to your Lola sometimes. That's respect, especially when it is a clumsy lie. I look into your dark world now and I wonder, where has all the love gone? I notice you don't have anything. That's okay too. You come from a people who feel good when we lose everything. When you lose everything, the only thing left is winning. In my day, you prayed for that kind of loss, and sometimes it would come, and when it came, you would laugh. You laughed so hard in that car, Reen, and it was because the joke was on you. Today, Reen, I'm a ghost, and someday soon you will be a ghost spirit. This is good. We know how to be ghosts. When you were a little girl, you crawled into the cupboards and crouched low and sat in the darkness and whispered, cupcake, cupcake, popping your peas loud like you were in a lip gloss commercial. You did that for hours. You knew just how to be still, just how to savor one word inside your mouth. Back then you knew how to disappear. We'd all sit at the same table, and Mucha would come scuttering and moving around like a feather duster. She did not see you. Maybe life is different in America. Maybe you need to jingle jangle more. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. If this is not enough, we can jingle jangle here in the Stride Right in heaven. We can dance and burn down the house and eat all the ashes.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a beautiful illustration of your ability to look at America from outside in, even though I know you're from here and you grew up here, but it's an incredible view of America that I hope that readers will take in and appreciate. Thank you. We are coming toward the end of our talk, and I wanted to talk about the coda of your book, which comes like a coda at the end. And it's something I have almost never, if never, seen in a book, and it's really powerful. Can you talk about what's in the coda and why you put it there?
Oh yeah, let's look at it.
Okay. And while you're looking, I'll read the first couple of sentences.
Okay.
The National Crime Information Center, to date, more than 5,800 Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit persons throughout the United States and Canada have been reported as missing or murdered. This novel asks that we recognize those who have died, those who are still missing, those who have survived, and their beloved grievers. And then you follow it with a list of names that almost felt like a prayer to me, like a litany for a prayer. It's just beautiful. And I wondered if you would talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it is. That's what it is. It's a prayer. And it's just like I said, this is hopefully perceived as a love letter. I mean, Picton hasn't been charged with all the murders, but there are still so many missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, but there are also a lot of people who have fallen ill to, like I said, economic violence and sexual violence and the foster care system. And so, I think that this is just one small way for me to acknowledge, and hopefully when people read this book, that they'll be interested and curious and look into what all is happening there.
Thank you. Well, it's a really, really powerful ending. Can you talk about what's next for you? I mean, you've given us these amazing two huge ideas for your PhD theses, so I can't believe you're doing two of them. But do you have other projects on your desk that you feel comfortable to talk about?
No, that's it. Hopefully that'll be enough. I'm doing that. I mean, I'm so happy that I get to like play and fiction again too. Now that this project is over, I can dump into another world if I want to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I see Morgan here, and I just very much want to thank you for what you've shared with us, and also really encourage anybody who's on the call to purchase Melissa's book, because I think it's a life changer, and it's going to have you think about things you might not have thought about, and the language is just magnificent, and you've heard some of it tonight, and I just can't thank you enough for sharing that with us, Melissa.
Thank you all, and thank you guys for coming. I mean, I love you all. I'm so happy that I get to do this thing that I've been wanting to do my whole life, and this is my first time talking to people about it. And so thanks for joining us in this weird computer space to talk about books and people that I love and things that I love. Thank you all.
Thank you. Morgan, while we have you, I know you want to close out. Will you just say a word about finding this on the YouTube channel when you close out? Is that okay?
Oh, yes. So we're streaming it there currently. So right after we exit off the event, it will be right on PNP's YouTube channel. If you just type in Politics and Prose in your search box, and you'll see this event. It should be the first one to pop up.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. And what a rich conversation. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And I want to, of course, thank you, Melissa, for doing this event with Politics and Prose. And thank you, Martha, for being a great moderator, of course. And most of all, we want to thank our PNP audience for tuning in and supporting us. And we continue to ask for your support by purchasing Melissa's book, which is in the chat there. And we also have a link to pre-order Martha's book, which comes out in September. And we wish everyone a great Monday night.